Okay, great. Good morning, everyone in the room and online. I hope more people from ADB who are in the building will come down and join us. So this morning, my name is Zonabel Woods, and I'm a gender specialist in the Gender Equality and Climate Change Department. We have been over the last year, we actually just had our anniversary over the last year, implementing a technical assistance project focusing on addressing women's resilience in the context of extreme heat. And as part of that work, we're also the secretariat for an ADB-wide task force on heat and gender. And as part of that work, we have been convening some learning sessions over the last about 5 months or so. And it is really, I think there's something wrong with the sound, so it sounds a bit sketchy. So it's really my pleasure to have this learning session today with Dr. Jason Lee, who's an associate professor at the Yung Lo Lin School of Medicine at the National University of Singapore, where he co-leads the Human Potential Translational Research Program and directs the Heat Resilience and Performance Center. He is a fellow of the American College of Sports Medicine, and his work focuses on understanding how our bodies respond to heat stress and developing strategies to ensure safety and optimal performance, even in extreme temperatures. So Dr. Lee plays a key role in shaping heat-related policies and guidelines both in Singapore and globally through his work with the World Health Organization and the International Commission on Occupational Health. So today, he'll share his experience on science and heat stress, the unique challenges it poses to women's health, and strategies for building resilience. I also want to say that it's in this work around heat resilience and extreme heat, there's a very few researchers actually from the region working on this issue. So it's really a great source of pride to also have Dr. Lee here with us, who comes from the region and is really working very hard to highlight the really important work that researchers in the region in Southeast Asia are doing on this topic. So please allow me to, let's welcome Dr. Lee today. And thank you for joining us.
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, I've been asked to use this mic. Sounds better, I think. Good morning. Thank you for having me. It's my first time to this wonderful complex. I traveled quite a bit in this part of the world, but in Philippines, this is probably my third or fourth time. The last time I was here, just a couple of months back, there was an ASEAN Medical School Dean's Summit. It was hosted by UP. And then through that, I learned some history about your country. I always say, I attend so many ASEAN-related events, right? There's always one night, they call it the country night, wear your attire, have some party. I always say my Filipino friends always know how to dance the best, sing the best, whereas my Singaporean counterparts, the best they could do, is the TikTok left and right, Yeah, so I'm always intrigued and amazed why in this region my Filipino counterparts seems to be able to enjoy more. Even though you look at it from an economic perspective, say Singaporeans, you are very blessed with resources. You should be the happiest. Not true. I think sometimes when you see, in Philippines, talk about climates, right? You see all sorts of disasters. So maybe sometime, when you are in a situation where you're seeing all sort of crises in life, you tend to enjoy life a little bit more. And the light seems to shine brighter in a darker place. Yeah, so in a way that I want to learn how you appreciate life a little bit more, because if Singapore, for example, keep on driving economic prosperity, right, that might not satisfy the citizens. So and the new government has said that the next phase we are entering is not just the economic proudness, but the social aspect, how we make people more contented, more community efforts. For example, in Singapore, right, we have this very bad practice. Any problem, government is responsible. No, but where are the communities? So we're also asking, solve your own problem. So HEATS is one good example. And if you have problem in your neighborhood, come together, volunteer, do something, knock at the door of that elderly. Don't always depend on the government. Okay, coming back to my talk. This is the first time I titled my presentation this way. I asked ChatGPT, could you give me something more exciting? Because sometimes I'm sick of myself saying the same content tonight. People say that you talk like a pastor, you're like a preacher, just nagging. So I'm trying to make this a little bit more exciting, I hope. So this title, I quite like it, for two reasons. No, one is the content, obviously, will be focusing on heat on women. I'll talk about some of the nuances, some assumptions. Hopefully, I can debunk some myths too, if I'm successful. But more importantly, the second message from this title is we need more women. And I see this room, I will show you my next slide. I'm equally proud to take leadership, to take action to drive this mandate. And also, you are already doing that. Zoni and team, when I has been champion, I've been following you very closely, and amazing, the advocacy, the work that we're doing within just 1 year. It feels many years, but just 1 year, so I'm looking at you to take the leadership and your team, to drive this mandate collectively. We need to define our destiny. And some of my content I will share, we cannot be shaped by what we read from the literature, which is dominated by largely global north literature, where you talk about heat in the form of heat waves. And also heat is present in that part of the world during summer. And that is exactly the reason for the longest time our region has not taken urgent actions. Because our immediate response is, what's the problem? Always hot, still hot, a bit hotter. We survive. If that 1-2 degrees increase, we will continue to survive. I call ourselves the boiling frogs. And recently I call ourselves in the smelly room. In the smelly room, when you're in the smelly room long enough, you don't smell that stink, that stench as much. Okay, so that's the context. Oh, maybe I need to stand closer here. Yep. Go back. Oh, it's a bit laggy. This is my team. I show this as a first slide because I had the privilege often to go around advocating the mandates, but this is the engine at the back working very hard as I speak. We are about 42, recruiting almost at a fortnightly basis. We are in need of more. Not to do this work in Singapore, the Heat Resilience Performance Center is largely a research camp. But recently, you might have heard we announced the Southeast Asia Heat Health Hub. That is not research per se. That is to harness research to push out communications in the right way, to build capacity. And also they work, hopefully, hand in glove. So we are still recruiting. So anyone who wants to have a stint in Singapore, we welcome you. This is a brief outline. I will expand a little bit because I will repeat some of this conversation in the afternoon. But I was told I was only given 9 minutes. And also I will just go straight to it. But I was told this morning I have a bit more time, so I'll elaborate a little bit more. But the outline remains the same. Okay, I hope by now you know we have entered into the new phase, not coined by me, coined by UN Secretary General last year. It's no longer global warming, guys. We have entered into the brand new phase, and we are boiling, and so that boiling frogs analogy is more prompt these days. If this is not enough,
more recently,
just a couple of months back, when we had a gathering,
call to action on extreme heat, because for an urgent and concerted effort to enhance international cooperation to address extreme heat
maybe there's
in critical areas. In tandem, the International Labour Organization also released a new report on global.
Just
what does it mean to Singapore, where we?
I'm sorry. This was a recorded slide, Yeah, there you go. That is this thing here. Yeah, that's audio. Just remove it. Okay, and we can go back again. Sorry for that technical glitch. Yep. That was the same slide I used. Hopefully it doesn't pop back again because as I speak right this morning, the Chinese government is also having a same policy brief on heat health. So because I'm here, I told them I will send a recorded presentation there. I think I briefly shared with Zoni. I said, Jason, don't get distracted, you'll be focused here. So I just sent a slide over. So this year, just a couple of months back, there are two more reports, again by UN, SecGen, a call for action on extreme heat. And the other area on workers' heat, occupational heat stress, something very close to my heart. In fact, in the various sectors that we are working on, heat on males' fertility, women's maternal health, thermal comfort, learning in school, all sorts of occupation, law enforcers, firefighters, military workers, agriculture workers, and of course the elderly, and then subpopulation like the disabled, even the pets. These are the spectrum of things that we want to do more. But one area that we are invested most to date is on our workers. Again, coming from a Singapore perspective, we are very blessed. We have a lot of migrant workers building the nation. I hope COVID, if not, remind us the real fabric and foundation of the society. The tycoons are good, we can tax them more. But really the one that are the engine, the fabric, the foundation are the workers who build all this infra, healthcare workers who took care of us, platform workers that deliver food, right? These days, I think our physical activity is very poor. And I'm an exercise physiologist, so I'm always advocating that get yourself fit, get yourself active. That is one most sustainable, potent way to be most heat resilient. Maybe I stand closer and I just signal.
So what does it mean to
Okay,
Singapore?
what
where
is
we are
different to
exposed
this
to
part of the
high
world?
temperature,
Oh, no,
high
sorry.
humidity
There's another audio.
all year round? This
I'm so
sustained
sorry.
exposure to heat
Yeah.
could mean from an occupational
Can you just
setting
stop
that
the...
productivity is compromised, which itself has huge economic.
This must be the few slide I added last minute. I should have, removed it. Is it okay? Yeah. It's no more, right? Okay, perfect. I will skip that slide. If you see audio, just help me to skip forward. That slide shows not just heat, humidity, but sustained exposure. So what it means, right? Heat is hurting us in other ways, not just heat stroke death. Because that has been the marker, at least from a Singaporean perspective. I believe that's also representative for this region. If heat is a problem, then the cause is mortality, morbidity. If we don't see those stats, right, then no problem. So there's one thing we need to quantify prospectively because there will be a lot more heat-related interventions investment make. So we need to baseline, and the science of doing that is epidemiology. Baseline, what is the current state? It gives you two outputs, right? One is you baseline it so that I'm sure 3, 5, 10 years later, your boss, after giving all the investment, you'll say, hey, have the needle move? We put so much resources, no? So don't wait until that question comes and they say, oh, we forgot to quantify the baseline, so we're just doing the work. So that's one. The other thing is from an epidemiological perspective, you see the signals for you to investigate. Epidemiology always say that is this association, but you cannot pinpoint what is the cause, right? It's okay. It gives you the signal, then you send in your brigade or investigator, and I want to know exactly what is the trigger. Because you won't know, right? I was amazed when I heard the stats in a couple of years back. You follow the news, right? In Canada, this little town called Leiden, remember? 2 years back, about 600 got killed because that little town never know about heat wave. And heat wave came. So in Canada, I was told the population, about 1% had this mental condition called schizophrenia. But during that heat waves, 12% in that 600 odd had that same condition. So immediately it gives a very strong signal. You assume if 1% in the population, then probably should be close to 1% during the heat wave. Why 12%? So that allows the first signal to probe, is it because of the medication that's related to that particular mental illness? Is it because these people usually are homeless, therefore less protected? Is it because of social economic status? And also allow us to find the signal and then investigate accordingly. So I hope this video, in partnership with BBC, will sum up the condition. And I again use the platform worker here as a use case to depict that it's no good just to push out policies. See it from a recipient's perspective. So I want to learn, when I heard from Zoni, this parametric insurance. I really think that we need to hack this. If the worker is motivated by doing as many orders as possible, and the policy say when it's hot, you should take a rest, right? If I'm that Grab worker, I say, you're talking about a potential risk of me getting heat injured. But I'm telling you, if I don't push out during hot days, I will suffer at the end of the day. So I will take the risk. Thank you very much, Zoni, Jason, and Tim, for your good advice. But no, I will push on. But how about during hot days? The clients, the customer, or even the employers see the need. And therefore, my pizza probably costs $1 more during hot days. So usually he delivers 6 orders in an hour during cool days. Now he delivers 4, and it's not shortchanged accordingly. So we need to approach from that concept. Don't just say good policies will be harnessed. So this video, I hope sum up my key messages. Okay, click.
I always say the best analogy to describe us is we are the boiling frogs. We are being cooked very slowly, and we are not even aware that we are being cooked. This year, we hit a 40-year record at 37 degrees Celsius. Bear in mind, in our context, it's not just about a high temperature, it's also about the high humidity. It is a problem that everyone will feel in the broader society. It's not climate change, it's climate crisis, because we are right in the midst of it.
My name is Charles, and I'm a full-time food delivery rider. Every day I work for about 10 to 12 hours. So under the sun, every day, non-stop. During really hot days, it's really, really tiring. So after work, I don't really have the energy to spend time with my kids.
As we near the thresholds of human limits, any small increase makes a difference, because at some point you can no longer lose the heat that you produce. Our leeway is getting tighter and tighter. And being in Singapore, I'm very proud that we are always proactive. No, we do not want to wait when that 40 degrees Celsius comes and then we ask ourselves, what should we do? The Heat Resilience and Performance Center is where we want to partner the best in class locally, regionally, and globally to undertake research and innovations to augment heat resilience, profiling different populations to understand their vulnerability. So using science and technology, we will be able to quantify core temperature continuously in real time. Doing so, we can understand the impacts. We can also prescribe very targeted solutions to reduce heat strain. We harness an array of techniques. For example, we use the ingestible temperature capsule. You can swallow it the day before or the morning if your profiling commences at night. That allows us to capture thermal strain continuously, incorporates with heart rates, that is a measure of cardiovascular strain. Put the two together, you get an overall physiological strain. In tandem, we also put on a watch, and there was an eye button, and that allows us to look at their skin temperature. In terms of real-time monitoring, we also want to build algorithms so that we can estimate heat strain non-invasively, and then very targeted solutions can be recommended. This job of delivery is of concern. You have factors that will result in a high heat strain or a hot body that we want to avoid. The impacts are impaired decision making. You might make a mistake and therefore accidents will happen. For child's moving ahead, I think we should have a sensor that when it crosses a certain threshold, there could be alerts sent to the rider and say you probably have to take more rest, hydrate yourself before you get overheated.
Method to advise riders how to reduce heat inside them is a good thing for us.
That is how we envisage as we move forward. Don't assume a one-size-fits-all. You must have a very targeted approach. And therefore, often behaviorally, right, they will disregard the increase environmental stress because they are there to earn. So that often differentiates. So it's wrong to assume.
A good example would be people with hypertension, maybe on beta blockers, and these are a group of medication that may potentially affect the capacity of the individual to sweat. And in diabetes patients, their ability to drink water in response to dehydration can be affected. And because of that, they can easily get dehydrated. And that state itself put them at risk for heat-related injuries.
Solutions could be very creative. A future mobile cooling center during periods of high heat stress. So let's tackle the problem upstream and not just be reactive. What we are doing here, a large part is the adaptation arms. We are buying time with these adaptation tools and solutions, pushing the boundary, right? Humans still need to survive right now, and that is essentially the mandate of what we are doing here. Welcome back here again.
50, it's pretty high.
It's not good just to live a life. We want them to enjoy their work out there. Solutions take time, but I'm an optimist. With science and technology, that is where we should push the boundary to augment heat resilience. And this is especially important in a warming world that we are experiencing.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. I think the video succinctly summarized my key messages here. This is 2 slides here to depict that it's more than just heat mortality, morbidity. Just thought I heard some brief conversation on eye health. How many of us here are myopic? I am, yeah. I have to wear my hard lens each day. The day after I have an important event I want to see, I'll put on my high lens the day before. 9 out of 10 Singaporeans are myopic. What about in the Philippines? I presume the numbers are quite high too. So because of, one, of course, there are a lot of reasons, but one key reason is the avoidance of outdoor heat. Yeah, it has a direct impact on dopamine release on your eye, vitamin D, and therefore your eye health can also be compromised in this case, it affects your eye directly. How about physical health? In our part of the world, there's almost no concept like, oh, my 10,000 steps, no problem lah, Jason, I just walk to work, 2-way, 15,000. We don't have that concept, right? You have to find time to exercise, and then you lay on in the Asian culture where I have time to wake up in the morning, we are so stressed over time. And also all these lay on, and the conclusion is, we don't go out and clock our incidental physical activity count. And in recent years, we say we have mental health issues, right? And we know that if you are physically unfit, not well, you don't go out there in the green and the park, then your mental health will be exacerbated. So you see, as a cascading impact, again, citing Singapore, wonderful healthcare system, good infrastructure, but the health burdens projections are not looking good. My hypothesis is any place that is not workable cannot be healthy. So in this case, it's not an infra in Singapore, obviously. It is that heat and humidity. If it's not enough, how about underneath that iceberg? There's a lot more for us to quantify. So from an economic perspective, since you're in ADB, right, I presume that economic imperative is a keyword here. That's also, I suspect, why in recent years, we begin to take more actions, because it's not just about heat mortality. The productivity loss per se is huge. That's from a worker's perspective, but you quantify each of these in monetary terms, right? And you know this investment is well made. Okay, so I will go to the second part, which is why you asked me to be here, talk about women's response to heat. I will break it down, hopefully systematically, and also talk about the physiological difference. What do you mean by physiological difference? So I break it down to hormonal differences, cardiovascular difference, anthropometric differences, so we can let the data guide us and conclude which area should be probed in this, in women's and heat. Okay, this is animation. So when you're hot, you will sweat, your vasodilate because of increased blood demands, right? Your heart rate has to increase, and more often than not, you're okay. But when you enter into the non-compensable thermoregulation states, right, your heart needs to beat more, which means that at some point that there will be reductions in blood flow and therefore oxygen to your vital organs. And you see, if you don't intervene, right, this will be the cascade of events, that will occur, increase in gut permeability. The toxins that were supposed to be residing within the gut now get leaked out into the portal circulation. So now your whole system is being intoxicated. If there's no intervention, then there will be a systemic inflammatory response. So now everything, red signal, still no intervention. Eventually, it will lead to multiple organ failure, and then you will die accordingly. Also, usually, if you see somebody or you get a news, unfortunately, somebody passed on in a marathon at a medical tent, you can almost immediately conclude that cannot be a heat stroke case. Could be cardiac arrest, because it does take this sequence, and usually as short as 3 days, could be as long as weeks in the hospital. Eventually, that unfortunate life can be compromised. My personal experience, not mine, but no one that is close. I work in the past for the military, a soldier, when we monitor the timeline of how they got a heat stroke, you see that classical, patterns. The kidneys will fail first. It eat out one organ after another, and a couple of weeks later, he passed on. Also, with the aging population in this part of the world, then aspects we'll see what I call the double whammy, or that the classical heat death, they can occur more, but also exertional heat stress will increase accordingly. So how does thermoregulation differ between women compared to men, right? I break it down. Number one, this anthropometric differences. I look at this and I put the blue word at the bottom, to anchor my point here. Lower body mass means you have less heat being generated. Lower body surface area, what it means that when you have the radiant heat, you have less being absorbed. Put together, actually, the higher body surface area to mass ratio, if anything, is advantageous for faster heat dissipation. So look at from this angle per se, you will conclude actually women are not inferior, but in anything more superior from an anthropometric perspective. And look at the most elite humans that can produce a lot of heat and win races. Who are they? Our elite marathoners. Usually they are small and lean, both men and women. So from this particular aspect, there doesn't seem to be any disadvantage. So be careful as you go about saying that it's all disadvantage. I was told by my sociologist and counterpart, say we don't want to accidentally position women in an inferior manner unless you have hard data to support. But I will go through the list, then we make a conclusion. So this is number one. So now we are probing one after another. Next slide. Oh, cardiovascular difference. Here you see something here, right? Lower VO2 max. Yes, you're right. Smaller heart, lesser cardiac output. So your VO2 max, the maximum oxygen you can consume, is usually lower in women because the smaller plasma volume and cardiac size. So from a cardiovascular perspective, yes. So imagine the first one we say is now, if anything, could be positive, but this one is a negative, which means now you have an absolute work demands in workplace, right? everything else the same, you'll find that the women have to work relatively harder compared to their male counterpart. And that puts them at risk. Likewise, you put somebody unfit, man or woman, in the absolute workload, the person will feel relatively harder and therefore can be compromised. So there's another area to protect. Thermoregulatory responses, usually it's breaking down to two parts, the dry heat loss, vasodilation. Women have this ability to use dry heat loss mechanism more than men. So here it says that more reliance on vasodilation. Usually you want to depend on your sweat evaporation because that is the most potent way to lose heat. But guys, that's where we get the details in our parts of the world. You can even challenge when the environment is so humid. Does it mean that the more you sweat, you are better off? It might not be the case, yeah? Of course, if you are somebody who doesn't sweat, right, if you sweat more, that is still gradient for you to lose, to evaporate the sweat. But over-sweating in our context might not be always good because you might, if anything, accelerate dehydration. So again, a lot of this data came from Global North on heat acclimatization, very potent way to get yourself prepared. But I challenge that part on increased sweating. How useful is that in our context? If sweat cannot be evaporated, you might accelerate dehydration. Okay, so think about that. At lower maximum sweat rates, if you push both men and women to the extreme, right, you'll find generally that women has lesser sweat rates compared to men. Again, depends your bias, right? You might say that is not good because I sweat less. Again, going back to my point, depends on context. I think men sweat excessively. And in Singapore, we used to be deprived of water, right? I say blame the men, because they sweat unnecessarily, run a bit, you sweat excessively. So we say women, you glow, right? You don't sweat. You seem to believe you just sweat enough and get it evaporated. So that's from a thermoregulatory perspective. Hormonal differences, the menstrual cycle goes this way. 2 weeks after menstruation, 2 weeks of follicular phase, you see the increase in estrogen, a decrease in progesterone. Actually, it's advantageous in terms of heat strain. It lowers your body core temperature, but it almost gets cancelled out at the later 2 weeks of your luteal phase, the last 2 weeks, where you see the increase in estrogen, but also the increase in progesterone, resulting in the increase in baseline core temperature. So you get hotter at the second phase of your menstrual cycle, but it cancels out. It's often something in the literature, saying that even in research design, because of menstruation, we need to control for it. There has accidentally, unintentionally removed female participants in research. Who undertake research most of the time? I tell you, most of them are undertaken by PhD students, right? And usually the trial goes this way, the man will arrive to the lab every week. So you have 4 trials. I can complete the study in a month. I can do more studies, publish more papers. Now you say because of this assumption, many researchers say, now what? I got to bring the women back every month. There's a chance that I will lose my participants. I need to finish my PhD faster. So now women seems like a risk to my PhD thesis. Why not I drop female participants and do more boys? See, they have changed behavior in terms of how we undertake research. Today, I think we are more progressive. I see more and more editors, right? If you don't give a solid justification in your manuscript submission why women are not included, right, then you're out almost immediately. Also, don't let this apparent assumption limit female participation, because the data is important to include more women in our studies. If not, even we just talk about indoor thermal comfort standards, right? Predominantly derived from white Caucasian men. If I do a poll right now, if I feel comfortable right now, usually not always the case because they are individual responders. Women will feel you are comfortable, but I feel a bit cold. Right now, I feel a bit hot. So my hypothesis, you are feeling okay. And now you see, for the women there, So you see, we break it down and see, okay, it's not very clear from a physiological perspective that women are disadvantaged. From an epidemiological study, they compared more than 4,000 servicemen and women and look at the various risk factors leading to heat stroke. This is done by US Army. And in conclusion, they found, if anything, their heat acclimatization status, their fitness level were more determinants in their risk of getting heat injured and not sex per se. Yeah, so what we are saying that if you are a woman, but you are very fit and very heat acclimatized, right, you could be more heat resilient than a man. So there are other factors at play and not sex per se, because the individual responses between humans seems to be greater than across the two population. So is this a psychological process? Are there this social behavior part that we need to probe further? So this part, there's not a lot of evidence. At best, it's conceptual, and it forms a framework using psychological data for us to probe further. So I'm putting together what I call a group of, candidly black widows. My super female researchers say, now this is a mandate. You got to study this from a psychological, social behavior perspective. So behavioral thermoregulation means defensive actions taken to decrease the overall physiological or perceptual impacts from the environment. So what you can do, you can dress lesser, you can reduce your work intensity, you can move to shade. So this is a behavioral thermoregulation, guys, is very powerful. If you should always harness behavioral thermoregulation first, then your autonomic means your physiological interventions. And one physiological or behavioral intervention is work-rest cycle. If you are feeling hot, just rest. So optimizing our work-rest cycle should always be the first step, because usually that is cost-free. You don't need a logistic hardware infrastructure. But of course, the employers will tell you there's only so much you can optimize, right? Don't tell me I will rest 45 minutes and work 5 minutes. That can't work because there's a bottom line to be met. Then after that, you optimize, you layer on. Is it cooling strategy, hydration, fans, heat acclimatization to meet the requirement? So from a behavioral thermoregulation, sex difference, women generally are more sensitive in many areas, but in this case, sensitive to warm stimuli. That's not a bad thing. That means your thermal sensation perception is actually more sensitive. That allows you to trigger actions accordingly. The boys, the men are a bit slow. After a while, they say, "Wow, very hot." And women feel it earlier, and therefore actions can be taken. In this case, behavior thermoregulations. So your initiation of behaviors commences earlier. Also, you're more sensitive. But if you layer this into context, right, we call it psychosociological factors. You put women in a group of men, predominantly men, for example, there are other threats at play, the stereotypes, identity, threats, belonging, uncertainty. I said a use case last year in Singapore, we finally had our first Singapore female ranger soldier. It's the most intense activity in the military. She made it. Not only she made it to made it in a group of men, the tremendous stress she was under to fulfill that 66, we call it 66 days of hell, a very tough cause. Likewise, I argue if you put a man in a group of predominantly women's activity, right, there will be undue stress on this minority. But in context, right, often it's the former. And in this case, what it means that because of that psychosociological threats, it might sort of override the intrinsic, the innate ability of women to behaviorally thermoregulate. In this case, highly motivate the need to match the demands of what this majority are doing. In this case, the men, although the sex differences is there, but you reduce the perception of thermal comforts. So now, by right, the women have the ability to sense the heat and therefore thermoregulate accordingly behaviorally, but now it's being overrode, does not perceive the heat stress anymore, and that can at times allow her to push harder. And if you overlay that, oh, I already said cardiovascularly, she's not as strong, that will present women at a higher risk of heat injury. Again, in our Asian context, and I'm not going to elaborate here, there are other social aspects, like somehow the mom is responsible for domestic work after work. And also, men, after work, you think that's your resting time, but for women, say no, there's a second part of that. So, see, it's all that social, that context, that burden that women, and it's not rocket science. If you overwork anyone, man or women, don't rest well or rest little because at night, somehow the mom has to be the default person to respond to the newborn, for example. Then you just add more work demands. And it's not rocket science. Any human will be compromised. So from a social perspective, we need to arrest that. Because from a context perspective, I totally agree. Somehow women could be disadvantaged from a heat resilience perspective. But coming from a physiological perspective, I'm arguing that aspect might not be the key area we want to probe and find the differences.
We are not doing.
So I want to conclude, by
sake.
sharing the work we have done.
Oops,
sorry. Let's go see. Yep. Can you just go next? Okay. Yeah. No, the two slides are the same. Basically, what we undertake in Project Heat Safe, right? We did the work in Singapore, Vietnam, Cambodia, and South Korea. And in one of the work packages, we look at indoor factory workers. They were dominated, about 90% of them were females. It's very painful when I look at this. When I was there with my team, a lot of these women were working under indoor. Indoor, please don't assume is cool and comfortable. Often indoor means that the natural ventilation is not there. And in certain contexts, in this case, it's a shoe-making factory, a lot of glue materials out there, and nobody wants that stench, to be spread, and therefore they don't use fans. And then many of them were pregnant. And I know the epidemiological data says that if you are being under chronic extreme heat, right, then the offsprings will be compromised. In worst case, stillbirth, if not born with inherent diseases, So we can't do that, right? If our young people, our next generation are supposed to tackle this more complex world, we must give them a good head start. And these are not rocket science, We just need them to preserve themselves. The employers ought to know. We can't see it from an occupational perspective because it will eat into the whole society. If there are more healthcare burdens, their bills have to be paid, maybe not at the factory, but somewhere down. So we're asking the government to look at it from a holistic perspective. Don't just look at it from one dimension. Say, no, I just need to work them as hard as possible. If they're unwell, then you pay the price in other ways. So we need a system engineering approach to look at heat threats and heat resilience. Okay, these are just some representative photos. There are a lot of heat sources within the indoor factory. Some goes as high as 150, 200 degrees Celsius just beside the female worker, constantly radiating the heat. So it's not a good. So I'm optimist. You saw in that video, I end my presentation by equipping you with not just sustainable, but very effective way to beat the heat. Aerobic conditioning, heat acclimatization, cooling, work rest cycle, hydration. Do that in this order. If you harness this correctly in face of a warming or global or a boiling world, you can tackle the heat accordingly. This day is not good enough just to have heat solution that is not sustainable. This is good. Before the pandemic, we say keep yourself fit for general health. During the pandemic, we say keep yourself fit to have a strong immune system. Now post-pandemic, I'm not being too demanding. I say keep yourself fit in face of a warming world. Also do one thing, you tick a lot of boxes. I will flash this. Basically, if somebody comes to you and say, I have a good heat gadget to beat the heat, right? You must, I reverse it a little bit. Go back. Without any heat management solution, once you hit your own threshold, your work tolerance and heat risk will increase. So any good gadgets of intervention must either decrease attenuate or extend your limits to tolerate heat. Because by doing so, look at the y-axis, your ability to tolerate heat is now expanded. And this expansion has a direct positive implication of your ability to do well in a hot environment. So if somebody comes to you and says, I have a gadget that can reduce heat strain and cannot explain whether it's reducing heat strain at the start, attenuates its strain during exercise, or expand it, then it's a gimmick. So remember, there's a lot of technology company telling you this one will solve your heat issue. Also question them accordingly. Also, the next steps, I will not read line by line. There's still a lot of gaps for us to uncover from a social, psychological pressures that can affect women in our society. More scope to look at the hormonal fluctuations, not just during the menstrual cycle. How about menopause? Third point, I already say, right? We need to have more, because if you don't include them, I roughly, and I don't have the hard numbers, that I would say probably 85% of the thermal or heat resilience data are predominantly on men, that 10-15%. Only in recent years, I see editors making more efforts, challenging the one who submit the manuscript. Where are the females? And finally, that was my first point I made, right? Not just including female women in the research. I think more women, and I think I don't have to emphasize that you are showing the way and take leadership and move this agenda
And
accordingly.
finally,
Okay, my final call is there was
not,
oh,
we are
am I
constantly
skip
thinking
again?
ahead. So here we are very blessed
Sorry.
that the government
Can you go back?
has blessed us with a state-of-the-art integrated.
Okay, can pause there. Thank you. Yeah, so I'm sorry, the audio clips are there. You saw the heat resilience, Southeast Asia Heat Health Hub. We announced that at COP28 last year. There was a new initiative, not a research cap, but a capacity and communication hub. We want to push on not just our research, but good research that are usable for policy out for this, towards this region. Also, with that, we are going to organize inaugural regional heat health forum in Singapore, and I will share more information with Zoni. I hope really you can consider a dedicated session in that forum to continue the momentum of heat resilience for women and beyond. Also, there's my invitation, and I think with that, I hope I have time to answer a few questions before you break for lunch. Thank you for your attention. Question, okay. I have a question on WhatsApp. Again, I apologize for the technical glitches. I have a message on WhatsApp, okay. Wow, from Zoom. Maybe Zoni, you want to start question?
But if you have a question on WhatsApp, do you want to take?
Let me just. Curious to know if these physiological and psychological insights are based on studies done in Asian women. If yes, maybe the links to the studies can be shared by the organizers as parts of the post-event communication. Easy question. Answer is no. None of these studies were done on Asian women. Yeah. But again, we need to have a basis, right? I always candidly tease people who propose their PhD topics. And one mistake they often made is because, Dr. Jason, this study has not been done in Singapore, so we must do this study. You could ask, why? And because there's a lot of things not done in the world. There must be a basis, because one will argue humans are humans are humans. Women are women are women. Men are men after all. So you must have a basis. Is there the context? Is there any hypothesis basis to warrant that? And also I think there's, in response to that, I think there is a need. And my bias is our context here is quite different. And don't assume we are tropically heat acclimatized. Hard data show, I'm not sure in Philippines, in Singapore, any human who live in Singapore, if you're not the workers, law enforcer, you spend more than 95% of your time each day indoor. So we are not tropically, physiologically heat acclimatized. We are behaviorally very good in escaping from the heat. Yeah. Okay, more questions?
there's no questions online. But I do have a question in terms of, your engagement with governments and on this issue. So I guess it's a two-pronged question. Governments in the region may be beginning to wake up to this issue. And so how do you think that they are sort of developing, policies to address, the health aspects of heat, extreme heat, the first one? And is gender even a question for them?
Yeah. In my work in this region, as I say, one of the focal areas that I prioritize on are the occupational sector. So I think the government is responding to this predominantly, if I may, because of the economy imperative. Because for the longest time, they thought, if you talk about these heat measures, this guy is talking about giving more rest, more welfare. He completely missed the boat, because we have a bottom line. And many of these are not MNCs, right? Small companies, and they need to survive. I didn't get a chance to share the data here, not just our data, but heat measures implemented in the right way are not just good for welfare and health. It's also good for business. A lot of the paying schemes are paid by fixed sum at the end of the day. We found in Project HeatSafe, in the control arm, when them serving as their own control, so very neat kind of experiment design. When you don't give them rest, what happened? The workers are very creative. They find their own rest. My researchers on the ground say, Jason, I noticed this is a control arm. They are going to toilets a lot more often. And we measure the physiological strain, right? If you understand heart rates, they are meaning an average about 90 beats per minute. That is pretty mild. I can only conclude a huge presentism on the ground. Because why? Again, from a behavioral perspective, if I'm the worker, I get the same pay at the end of the day. Why do I need to work so hard, especially when it's hot? I'll just wait for the time to pass, 6 o'clock, high five, I get my pay. It's a different ball game altogether now that worker is a platform workers, which I just cite you the example. Now the whole behavior intrinsic motivation is no, I'm going to work as hard as possible. So you need another approach to tackle that accordingly. Yeah. Sorry, Zoni, what is your second question? Yeah, no, I think I have not heard a lot of conversation other than coming from Zoni and team in this part of the world. In other parts of the world, yes, I think there's more emphasis. In Singapore, we begin to sort of impose new experiments. You have to have female participations. But I can't say that, at least in Southeast Asia, can't even remember when was the last time I had a conversation when the policymaker said, Jason, how about the female worker or the female counterparts? So no, the short answer is there's significantly lack of awareness and conversation on that. Yeah.
Oh, I think he's got it behind.
Hi. So in your Heat Resilience and Performance Center, how do you address the differences between men and women, or boys and girls, males and females? So what are the different interventions you give for men differing from women? I mean, given the research data that you have already, how are the interventions different for males and females?
Yeah, thanks. We don't, broad approach, we don't have the bias and say this must be a set of recommendations for men and women, because I know even within the group of women and men, there are individual responses. So what we are doing is we want to optimize the policy. If it's covering, let's say, 70% from a conceptual perspective, we want to do research, and we have that slide I briefly flashed, right? The research has gone into the augmentation of policy, and the Ministry of Manpower in Singapore, which is responsible, had done the audit and know who didn't respond accordingly, and we are constantly refining that. But policy can only do that much. Policy is not meant to catch an outlier, because the goalpost is very tight here. We are saying that we don't want any heat stroke death. So my proposal to the government is you cannot base on policy. Augment your policy to catch the majority and overlay. In this case, we are asking low-cost physiological monitoring to catch the remaining outliers. May they be men or women. there will be outliers. And also that we can strengthen this catchment. Don't let people fall out because you cannot go down to the lowest denominator because I tell you that wouldn't work. If you are so conservative, right, and the employer say that, hey, my guys are hardly work and you ask them to rest, right, they'll find ways to bypass your policies. We don't want that. We want evidence-based. When guys are working hard, you should rest. And even there's a concept, if I'm a fitter guy in this cohort there, can I do more work? And then your paying model, you have to pay me more. If not, why should I be doing so much? Where the guy is not doing much, I get the same pay as him. So this whole paying model, so it's not a physiological approach. That's just providing the first step evidence, but you need the whole system to come together. Yeah, so again, my short response is no, we don't have female-specific policy based on the work that we undertake here. We look at them from individual human, and because of the great differences even within each gender or sex. Thank you.
Are there other questions? So Jason, if I may, I do want to challenge a little bit on the physiological aspect of it because it often comes up as a source of debate and it can be questioned. And I do understand that it is related to the physiological as well as the social aspects that put women at greater risk. But some of the studies that we have seen are really, for example, the military one. These are people that are fit, that are well fed, that have certain sort of conditions, right? But when we're talking about sort of women in general, large population of women, particularly in developing countries, experience malnutrition, dehydration, extreme sort of burden of care. So all of these, as you noted, all of these factors actually have an impact on their health.
Yeah.
So we're starting as women from already I guess, challenges already to our health. And then on top of that, dealing with heat. So how do we kind of frame this discussion a little bit differently? Because otherwise, if we say there's no difference, there's no physiological difference. And so, then I think we're not doing sort of, we're doing a bit of disservice to the other factors that affect women's health. So just wanted to challenge you.
Yeah, actually, there's not a challenge. We are in agreement.
Okay.
I know we are saying that from a context perspective, women in the population of interest are really less trained, less fed, probably overwork, less rest. All these added together, you will compromise the physiology, the capacity of physiological capacity to deal with any stressor, in this case, heat stress. I'm saying that if you look at just physiological per se, assuming that this person, man or woman, is not underfed, is well-trained, well-heat acclimatized, right? There is no strong evidence to suggest women per se is disadvantaged. But from a contextualized perspective, you say no, because of all these added burdens from the families, from the community, from the whole system, right? The women are not in that kind of shape that I'm talking about. Then yes, from a context perspective, women are not physiologically as strong, and therefore not just heat, right? Any kind of stressor will perturb them more as compared to the male counterparts. So we're actually in agreement, and it's more from the context. So yours is more ecological, robust, because now you put everything into the context. I'm just extracting from a physiological perspective. Now you are women. I bring you out. I get you physically fit, well-fed, heat acclimatized, give you hydration, cooling, right? I don't think you are inferior because you have all these holistic package of heat interventions. Thanks, Zoni.
So if there's no other questions, we are at the hour. So thank you very much. Jason, so this is the majority of our gender colleagues, and I'm always so grateful for them because they always show up for these discussions. And I think really at ADB at the moment, we're the best informed team on heat stress and extreme heat because of these events and because they always come out to support. So thank you everybody for joining us and those online, and thank you for presenting this morning.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
please join us for snacks at the Zone D elevator beside that.